Last night I took a couple of minutes out of my night to play a little bit of Devil May Cry 2 or 3. I fully intended to go through the entire series prepping for Devil May Cry 5, which I own on Steam. I really wanted to do an in-depth video talking about like why Devil May Cry is a bad series, why it doesn't hold up, why it doesn't live up to its reputation, why the fanboys are full of crap, whatever they talk about, how innovative and how genre defining it is. Like I have always disliked Devil May Cry. I consider it far inferior to all of its direct competitors. There are so many like minor Capcom franchises that I would consider way better than this. And going playing through Devil May Cry 1 again really solidified that experience. It was a painful procedure. And after playing a little bit of Devil May Cry 2 and 3, they are worse. Yes, I do believe that the best Devil May Cry game is the original, the creators of which, by the way, went on and made a much better series, Bayonetta, while Devil May Cry languished with Capcom. Causing continuity problems, creating issues with balance and gameplay direction and tone. Like Devil May Cry has just been all over the place, and nobody wants to admit it because it's Devil May Cry. It's one of the best action game series ever made. What is it? The only action game series you've ever played? Like, get over yourself. It is a complete joke how much the series is worshipped, how it's hyped up as the greatest thing ever, when Devil May Cry 2 in particular might be the single worst game I've ever played. Like, I think I would put it up there with like Superman 64 or Bubsy 3D or like The Last of Us Part 2 as being like some of the most broken, asinine, ridiculous, contrived, like just completely broken experiences I've ever seen in my life. Like, Devil May Cry 2 is fundamentally flawed, right? There is nothing good about this game. Nothing. It is downright unplayable. And any real developer, any real game designer, anyone who had to develop for a real piece of hardware on a Nintendo system would never have put out such a broken, unfinished mess, right? Devil May Cry 2 is indicative of the console it released on. It is just complete garbage, right? It is just complete crap. And Devil May Cry 3 was worshipped because it was better than that, but it's still just mid. Like when you compare it to Ninja Gaiden Black, which came out around the same time, like you really get this sense for how much better Xbox developers were handling their franchises at that time. How much better Dead or Alive, like Team Ninja was than Capcom, right? How Ninja Gaiden in general is a much stronger IP than Devil May Cry, and yet it's way more difficult, has way more memorable characters, way more internal consistency. It has like real technical depth, real complexity, great environments, great cinematography. Like it's just better, like objectively. This isn't like up for debate. This isn't like, a matter of personal preferences. Like Ninja Gaiden is just better. It has had a longer history on Nintendo consoles, and it's also just a better game, period, right? There's just no getting around it, right? Like Ninja Gaiden should be considered like the peak of action games, but unfortunately, because of the religious obsession that Devil May Cry fans have with Dante and Virgil and presenting them as the strongest characters in gaming, like this narrative has kind of like established itself in the consensus in the action game community that Devil May Cry is not only a good action game series, but one of the best ever made. When I would argue it's borderline unplayable, broken, and not all that interesting, and is overshadowed by so many other dozens of other superior action games from the 2000s to the 90s and even the 80s. Like there is nothing about Devil May Cry 1 that really sticks out to me other than maybe the atmosphere and music as being like particularly interesting or engaging. And those aspects, the aspects that I enjoyed, the dark atmosphere, the music, like those were stripped away with the sequels to the point where like Devil May Cry 3, it almost feels like a parody of itself. And the parody eventually became the real thing, right? With Devil May Cry 4 and 5, focusing on characters that aren't Dante, that we don't care about, that nobody really can get invested in at all if they were like ever paying attention to the story or the lore or like what was happening with the plot. Like it's been all over the place so long that nobody really processes this. Like, the only reason you would enjoy something like Devil May Cry 3, 4, or 5 is if you don't actually think about what you're experiencing, what you're playing, right? And this is a game where you can just mash the X button with like a single hand and get through combat encounters just fine, right? I demonstrated that on stream, how easy it was in Devil May Cry 2 to do that. This series is a complete joke, right? It's brain dead. It's not all that compelling. The action isn't good. It's not all that difficult. Like, all of the memes that have persisted since the mid 2000s, like, just are just that. They're just memes. They're not actually based in reality. They're not actually reflective of the actual experience of playing Devil May Cry, right? Devil May Cry simply is not all that strong of an IP. Like, it never will be, never was, never has been. Like, that is Devil May Cry. It's just a mediocre IP propped up by desperate PlayStation fanboys. Now, this feeling also extends to like other projects that Itsuno and Capcom have worked on. There are a lot of Capcom games over the past couple of years that like people have hyped up to be fantastic, like straight up masterpieces, in spite of not being that great. Resident Evil 2 remake is probably the big one, but I think this also extends to stuff like Monster Hunter World, to Street Fighter 6, to Resident Evil 4 remake, to just so many Capcom games have come out, been worshipped, and nobody really talks about their actual problems, right? Their actual lack of quality compared to their Nintendo equivalents, right? Nobody wants to admit that Capcom does not live up to their reputation, right? The narrative right now is that Capcom is one of the best developers in the industry, and that Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to be one of the best games ever made. But like, what exactly have we seen from Dragon's Dogma 2 that's in any way interesting or innovative, right? The original Dragon's Dogma was overrated to begin with by fanboys who just saw those vaguely berserk-looking designs and thought it was like the coolest thing ever, because they've never talked to a real woman. But Dragon's Dogma is just, much like Devil May Cry, is a series hyped up purely by its reputation, right? I played Dragon's Dogma because I heard it was a really great action RPG for fans of like hardcore action games, right? The most technical action RPG ever made, right? Something that focuses on the action rather than the RPG part. And playing it, I was not impressed. It was dumb, right? There was nothing interesting about Dragon's Dogma. It didn't really appeal to me at all. I don't understand like the fascination with it. And I do think the appeal lies solely on the fact that Capcom produced it. They had Itsuno make this game. It's Itsuno's game, right? That is my opinion of Dragon's Dogma 2. And I suppose that is kind of my mindset going into this this PlayStation hype period, right, where people are pretending that every major PlayStation 5 release is some major deal, right? You're having people like freaking out of Street Fighter 6, even though it's like fallen off the radar already. You had people worshiping Resident Evil 4 remake. You had Dead Space remastered. So many games have like come and gone already this year, and we still have quite a few more to go, right? We have Starfield, we have future installments. There are games that the PlayStation audience are going to try and convince you are masterpieces. And I do think that we as gamers really need to stop taking this so seriously, right? Like, if someone tells you that Devil May Cry is a good series, you really should just, slap them across the face with a copy of Bayonetta, of Ninja Gaiden Black, of God Hand, or whatever else you have lying around, like Unamusha Warlords, River City Girls, so many other better action games out there than this poor man's The Divine Comedy, right? Devil May Cry, or should have been Devil Never Cry a long time ago. I don't understand this. The game, the original makes this very clear, is that they changed the bar's name to Devil May Never Cry at the end of the original Devil May Cry. That is the point, right? The story has concluded. So, again, it's the creators of the sequels, which I consider to be non-canon, don't really understand Dante and his motivations, his relationship with Trish, what the whole adventure means to him as a character and stuff like that. They completely dropped the ball in a big way from Devil May Cry 2 onwards, and nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to admit that Capcom has like bungled this IP for 20 years, because doing that will admit that like better action games exist, and when it comes to Devil May Cry fans, we just simply can't have that.